Harry Potter. We've finally made it. It took us 4 videos and 3 years, but at last, here we are. No more friendlies on the Quidditch field, this is grand finals of the World Cup. Today, this series comes to a close with the most popular and well-remembered Harry Potter game on a handheld Nintendo system. To coincide with the release of our boy's 3rd trip to the movies, developer Kryptonite Games released the true follow-up to the 2 Game Boy Color RPGs. And 15 years later, I'm gonna see how it stacks up. I did my waiting! And so have you. With all this in mind, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban for the Game Boy Advance. Leaving digitized graphics and isometric angles behind, the final Harry Potter RPG in the Game Boy family is unmistakably a return to the look of the Game Boy Color installments. Anyone with an experienced eye will recognize the spells, items, and mechanics that defined Harry's pair of 8-bit adventures, in addition to revamps of some series hallmarks. The weird blue caterpillars once representing unknown enemies are now more sensible blue orbs, and character portraits are no longer confined in crammed text boxes, even if the art itself ranges from acceptable to, Rupert Grint. But Prisoner of Azkaban is much more than just a pretty face. Its gameplay and design has also been improved. I think I was being a little hasty when I declared one line of Harry Potter games was abandoned in favor of the other, because Prisoner of Azkaban feels like a fusion of the 2 playstyles that came before it. It's not exactly a clean combination, but the puzzle adventure design adds texture to the RPG overworld. Especially when you whip out your wand. Oh, get your heads out of the game's most significant contribution is the inclusion of usable spells outside of battle, a design choice taken directly from the previous GBA games. Harry, Ron, and Hermione now traverse Hogwarts Castle and its surrounding areas using Flipendo, Lumos, and Spongify, among others. For the first time in any Harry Potter Game Boy game, Ron and Hermione are fully playable on the Overworld, complete with their own exclusive spells for puzzle solving. The game even includes branching paths, so players can choose whom to play during a given story beat, adding a more rounded sense of storytelling to the proceedings. I especially appreciate these sections after 4 games of nothing but old Harold James over here. Though the core RPG gameplay remains, Prisoner of Azkaban takes full advantage of the Game Boy Advance's powered-up processor, with a brand new battle screen. Instead of borrowing Final Fantasy's flat-facing plane for a 3rd time, HPGBA 3 uses the magic of 32-bit rotational processing, granting a 3rd-ish dimension to the battlefield. This time, the camera hovers behind Harry, Ron, and Hermione, their opponents a noticeable distance away. Some might see this approach as like a Pokémon battle in a mirror, but it's actually reminiscent of a different Game Boy Advance RPG, Golden Sun. Thankfully, there's more than just Camelot copycatting. Above familiar spell selections and menus is a diagram determining who takes their turn and when. It is the single most important new addition to combat, since the order of every battle is randomized. The diagram is a godsend for strategy, because when your back's against the wall, you need to know how to outlast the toughest of your school's most unwelcome visitors. Speaking of strategy, integral to maneuvering Prisoner of Azkaban is the little magnifying glass icon in the battle menu called Informus. Introduced in Chamber of Secrets, Informus analyzes and records enemies in your bestiary, the Folio Brutii. Brutii? These words, man. From there, you can check how each foe responds to your lineup of spells, so you're not just casting your best guess all willy-nilly. It may seem like needless record keeping, but knowing what spells to cast on what creature is essential later in the game. It's also kind of exhilarating in a way. Casting Informus on a never-before-seen opponent means you're gaining the know-how on your own, which is satisfying on a level not felt in the previous games. You know, it's almost as if you're learning, like you're a student at a school or something. Informus also helps in a more visual sense, identifying enemies on the Overworld, a series first. No longer is each oncoming threat a complete mystery, as long as every enemy has been registered in the Folio Brutii. the Potter decks, your sight is tangibly elevated. Navigating a new area and watching the orbs slowly unmask is really satisfying. Unfortunately, you can't actually attack enemies on the overworld, which feels like a huge missed opportunity. I guess not every RPG has to be Earthbound or Persona, but it would have been nice to have some element of interactivity with enemies that extends beyond just running into them, especially when you can use spells outside of battle, like I mentioned earlier. And that's not the only drawback. For all of Prisoner of Azkaban's advances, there are some surprising steps backward, and unfortunately a lot of them have to do with fusing the two genres together. Like I said, it's not a clean combination. Casting spells in the overworld makes a great first impression when you're rescuing Crookshanks at Grimmauld Place or barricading the doors aboard the Hogwarts Express. But then you begin the actual school year, and the bulk of your spellcasting is delegated to class challenge rooms, another design choice returning from past Advanced Adventures. Though not as obvious as the ones in the previous HPGBA games, these rooms still regress the series back to fetch quests, replacing genuine story progression. Yeah, nothing says compelling gameplay like, "Hello Harry, welcome to class. Go get this thing I need." To be fair, this does wear off in the endgame stretch, when the story's climax takes center stage, but that renders the educational part of the game much worse by comparison. It's like, oh, now I get to participate in the story of the best Harry Potter movie and the second best book. Third best book. It changes a lot. Look, I know needless busy work is part of going to school in real life, but that doesn't mean it needs to be part of your fictional wizard school video game. I think it's especially tedious with the RPG gameplay because you're fighting enemies in a section that was only made to pad out the plot. It's like they wanted to bring together the best of both playstyles, but forgot the reasons why one was a lot better than the other. Something I haven't really mentioned in this series is the weird position a Harry Potter RPG inherently gives a player who's familiar with the genre. Like me. If I'm playing a classical, turn-based RPG like, I don't know, Dragon Quest or Final Fantasy, I try to keep my team balanced. Make sure Eric's dealing physical damage while Aerith's healing everyone in the meantime, that kind of thing. But in these Harry Potter games, there are no swords to wield or hands to catch, I guess. You've got three kids whose attack power begins and ends on the tips of those magic sticks they carry around. These Harry Potter games, they're like playing Final Fantasy with three black mages, and as you might assume, that carries with it a different flow. It's just a different way to play RPGs. The innate disadvantages in this setup weren't really an issue in the previous games, but oh dear. It's a different story here. At the risk of sounding like a Hogwarts professor, let's talk about magic. As is tradition in this series and genre, Harry lives on HP and survives on MP, or magic points. All but one of the spells Harry learns throughout his third term cost MP, and as enemies get tougher during your adventure, stronger spells naturally cost more MP. You level up spells as you use them, in addition to leveling up normally, so the issue isn't strength, it's character growth. You simply don't increase your maximum MP enough to maintain the costs when you level up. There's no way to approach magic sensibly or moderately. Incendio Trio. In this economy. At a certain point, you'll need to whip out your Vertimilius duos and your Petrificus Totalicises to take care of the game's deadliest enemies, and there just aren't enough pepper-up potions in the wizarding world to keep you stocked without going bankrupt at Fred and George's. This was never a big issue in previous Harry Potter RPGs because your magic points increased substantially as you leveled up, but here, it barely increases at all. I assume this was to bump up the difficulty so every encounter can feel weighted and eventful, but now leveling up is only good for keeping your health and magic points replenished. Thank Godric leveling up is frequent, otherwise it would be useless. This imbalance of magical intake and magical usage especially becomes a problem when faced with Prisoner of Azkaban's true villain, random missed attacks. Now look, accuracy is a part of most RPGs, and it can be a deciding factor in equipping weapons or using magic. But if you know anything about Harry Potter, you know everyone's only got one wand. Well, most of the time. So without any weapons to swap, there is no external strategy to accuracy or hit rate. You just cast your spell and pray to the four founders it lands. And the times it doesn't? A heap of magic points completely wasted. It is infuriating. If I'm coming off a bit harsh, it's because these problems are all stacked together. The tediousness of the fetch quests, made worse by the never-ending shortage of magic points, made worse by the uncontrollable accuracy of the spells you cast. Now, the reason I'm willing to look past those issues, mostly, is because the rest of the game is solid and satisfying. All the stuff I loved about the previous RPGs is still intact, with little quality of life adjustments, like choosing how many of one item to consume at once, or earning EXP when you complete an objective. And you know, the quality also extends to the music. Now that's a segue. Even with a sound chip as limited as the Game Boy Advance's, Prisoner of Azkaban's soundtrack is really impressive work. Ian Stalker, the man behind the music, creates a soundscape that captures the Wizarding World's rhythm better than even most of the movie's composers. Although a handful of tracks are crunched-up compositions from the PC and console release, the majority of Azkaban Advance's music is original and delightful. High marks go to the Dementor Overture, which brings the terror of the soul-sucking centuries front and center, despite the restrictive hardware. Look, it's not a masterclass work like the music of Chamber of Secrets on Game Boy Color, but it's still good on its own merits. I don't know how it keeps happening, but with these games, the quality of the music reflects the quality of the game, so yes. Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban on the Game Boy Advance is a good video game. At times, it does feel like a step back, and I can think of at least 3 better RPGs on the GBA, but you know, the Ballad of Harry and the Wolf is still an experience worth having in 32 bits, warts and all. And hey, the fact that a licensed movie tie-in Game Boy Advance game was not only good, but interesting and layered and complete is meaningful all on its own. And now that I think about it, that's why this whole series of games was worth its own series of reviews. Like, none of these had to be good, you know. Make a game starring the boy who lived, and the boy's name will do the work for you. It would have been an easy call, just slap something together, put Harry Potter's name on it, ship it, and reap the rewards. But we got good games. A few good games, because the right call was made instead of the easy one, which is pretty fitting. After all, if there's one franchise that knows the difference between choosing what is right and what is easy, it's most definitely Harry Potter. Thank you for joining me on this 3-year journey. In our time together, I've come to appreciate these long-forgotten games in a whole new way, and maybe you have too. Now, I do know that there are other Harry Potter games on Game Boy Advance and Nintendo DS, but Prisoner of Azkaban was the final game from Kryptonite Games under the Harry Potter brand, and from what I understand, Portable Potter really takes a nosedive from here. Personally, I'd rather end this on a good note than not. Though this series is finished, I'm certainly not done with the Wizarding World, so make sure you're subscribed to this channel so you know exactly when the next video hits, whether it's Harry Potter or not. Who knows? I might even review more Harry Potter video games in the future. I just gotta figure out how to run old PC games on my Macintosh. Whatever. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and thank you for a wild 3 years on YouTube. Until next time. Should think of a better catchphrase than until next time.